Well, in today's video, we're going to finish disassembling this Ruger single 6. And then we're going to head back to the house. Where it's cool, answer some questions, make some modifications, thanks in part to the good folks at powercustom.com. Then we're going to get it back together and do some shooting. But like I said, before any of that can happen, we've got to get this barrel off. There it is. Now let's head back to the house and get to work. Hi, George here, and welcome to Tales from Target Suite, where I'll share my perspective on guns and shooting, and we'll have an adventure or two that'll make even a grown man smile. And we do have a lot to cover, and so I'm going to yak less, but there are some things I need to explain. I'm going to try to yak less, and I'm going to give you a list of the topics that we're going to go through. And then I'm going to put the timestamp for each of those segments in the description below. And so if there are things you'd like to skip or things you'd like to come back to, then the timestamp is going to be in the description below. But the first thing I wanted to discuss was that this is a video about gun modification and gun assembly disassembly at some level. And I have learned more and more about YouTube, and YouTube is clear in their firearms related content that if you have videos showing disassembly or modification, that you should not turn on monetization. And so that means that my channel will make $0 from this video. But it's an important video, obviously, because we're wrapping up what is the sum total of 7 or 8 other videos, and so it is something that I definitely want to do. But it also brings up the question: if you would like to see more content like this, more technical content that involves disassembly or modification of firearms, then I need some help through Patreon.com. And so check out the link to that is in the description below. And so if you would consider supporting me on patreon.com for $3 or $5 or whatever it is a month that you would like to do, $7 I think is one of my things, then I would appreciate that. I certainly appreciate all of my patrons, and I'm very thankful for you guys and girls. But here are the topics that we're going to cover today. First, I'm going to talk about the frame thread deformation and why the barrel was so hard to get off in the first place. And then I'm going to introduce a segment about building these frame blocks, because without a quality frame block, you're not getting a frame off of a revolver barrel. And so that was an interesting project, and that happened back in my shop back in Houston. So then we're going to ream the forcing cone, and it's something that we had questioned all along, was the forcing cone cut off center to the bore axis. So I actually have most of the tools I need from Brownells to ream that forcing cone, and I'm going to show you how I will modify one of the shafts to custom fit this barrel. And then we're going to reassemble the gun using parts from powercustom.com. And I've mentioned Ron Power in the past. I had a long conversation with him. He was very helpful in getting me started on the modification part of the gun. And then sent me some parts for me to modify and examples of parts that he had modified himself. So to get me started in the right direction. And so I'm really thankful to Mr. Ron Power and PowerCustom.com. And then we're going to use my new bore scope I got from Teslong, and it's a pistol length bore scope that makes it a lot more convenient when you're inspecting chamber to bore alignment, which we're going to do after we get the gun reassembled. We're going to check that alignment, and then we are going to shoot and see if our 22 Magnum is going to have any better precision capability than it did before these modifications. And so again, all those timestamps are going to be in the description. But let's talk about the threads on the frame and why the barrel was so hard to get off. And the bottom line is, when they bored the hole for the barrel threads in the frame, they didn't chamfer the hole before they cut the threads. And so in the thread cutting process, it formed a huge burr all the way around the outside of the threads, and that burr was proud about maybe 50 thousandths of an inch. And so when the barrel was threaded on, it had to reform that burr, and then as the shoulder of the barrel found home, it crushed that burr back into the frame. And so I had to work through all of that extreme pressure to get the barrel off. And I have since cleaned up that burr and then repolished this surface, reground this surface to make it nice and flat and smooth without the burr. And so that's the first thing. That was the first thing we were going to talk about. But then I want to introduce a segment about the frame blocks. And like I said, this is a project I did back in my shop in Houston. And so let's take a look and see how that went. So those two blocks are way oversized, and I will cut them down once I get the epoxy coated on those surfaces right there. And then we'll get them squeezed onto the frame like that, let them set up. But let's get started with number one, and I'll mix some epoxy right now. And I did put a couple of coats of wax, and you can see that right here, a couple of coats of wax on the frame and barrel to make sure that none of this epoxy putty would stick to the metal surface, because that would really spoil a project that's lasted now for 7 videos. Okay, all right, go. Oh, it's starting to harden. Let's see if I can get this done. Okay, let's just see what we've got here. So there's our first one. Let me get this moved over into the middle of the table. And I used some really strong magnets here to hold the pistol in place. And let's get those out of the way now. And see if we can get this guy off. Oh yeah, really easy. Really easy. Really nice. Okay. Even got a Ruger 22 caliber single six. Okay, this piece of the puzzle was easy to get. This is the first one that came from Brownells, and that is the actual 11-degree forcing cone reamer. But what I couldn't get was the right sized, they call this the reamer shaft, and it needs to be sized for the barrel bore diameter. And so it just so happens, and by the way, one of the things that you patrons allow for me to do is to get things like this set of pin gauges to do things just like this. And so I have a .220 pin gauge. If it'll focus on that, there it is. 0.220 inches, and that's the largest pin that can go in that bore. And so with that information and my micrometer, which measured this piece of tinfoil at 0.0007 inches, I know that if I put 3 wraps around this 0.213 diameter shaft, that when I pull that foil wrap back into the barrel, then this is going to be a pretty, it won't be a tight fit, but it will take up most of that slack, even more so than had I gotten the correct size, which I think the largest they had was 215. And so let's get the handle installed through the barrel. And then I'm going to put a little oil down here. And we'll screw the reamer on. And now I'm going to do 3 wraps. 3 wraps with this right here. Two, 3. That's about 3 wraps right there. Now we'll let that foil go back into the barrel. And since I didn't attach the foil to the shaft, then the foil will not spin inside the barrel, but the shaft will spin inside the foil. And so we're going to do this one little bit at a time. It's going to take a little while. I don't want that. I want the oil. Put some oil here. And then I'll pull from the handle end. And then I'll turn. And then we're going to do this process over several times while I inspect the forcing cone. I don't want to cut too much. Okay, well there it is. We still have just a shade right there, but I'm not going to touch it. I think we're good enough to go on the forcing cone. And there's our 11-degree forcing cone. Let's hope this works. Now let's get the gun reassembled. Okay, there's two things I want to do before we reassemble the Ruger Single 6. Number one, I want to talk about a theory that I proposed about the bore axis not being lined up with the barrel. And number two, we need to fit that oversized pawl from Power Custom into the frame and cylinder here. And so first let's talk about that theory. And I'll pop up this image here and you can see it. You can see that the dark circle in the middle is one of the chambers of the cylinder, and the cylinder is just loose. I don't have any other hardware in there right now, but you can see that the chamber is biased high relative to the bore axis of the barrel. And I'm using the Tesla bore scope here, and I'd hoped to use the shorter version, but all of a sudden I couldn't get an image to pop up, and so we've got the original one you've seen before. But if my theory is correct, then I can rotate this barrel, and it's loose. I can rotate this barrel 180 degrees, and that up and down misalignment should change. And so let's do that and see what happens. Okay, there's 180 degrees, and right now it looks like the chamber and the bore are almost perfectly aligned. And so that kind of is what I was suspecting. Let's rotate it back. Okay. There you have it. So we'll talk more about that, and we'll talk about some numbers about how much it's misaligned once we get everything put back together. Now let's take a look at that oversized pawl. Okay, this is important. I'm no gunsmith, and what I'm going to be doing here is modifying guns. And so if you decide to modify your own guns, then do so at your own risk, because I am no gunsmith. And so with that said, we are going to take this oversized pawl that I got from Power Custom. Thank you, Mr. Ron Power. And we're going to modify that to go in to fit the frame and the cylinder of my old model Ruger Single 6. And so with that said, page 200 and following, 201 and following of this great book from Jerry Kuhnhausen is a great source of information. And so if you're going to do any work on your Ruger firearms, man, I would get one of these. And what came with the oversized pawl is a really neat set of instructions. It's very thorough. And so between the book from Jerry Kuhnhausen, information from Grandmasters LLC, which is powercustom.com, then I'm hoping we can get this thing done. And I do have, and one of the nice things that Mr. Power did is he provided me with his own pawl that he had modified for his Ruger Single 6. And so what that does for me is it shows me the surfaces that I need to adjust, and it gives me a rough idea of basically a rough idea of what I need to do. And by the way, I took his pawl and I assembled it into my Ruger Single 6, and it was a perfect fit and solved almost all of our problems. And so my goal here is to modify my own pawl to work as good in my Ruger Single 6 as Ron Power's personal pawl worked in my Ruger Single 6. So with all of that yakking said, let's get started. And by the way, that's just some magnets that I'm using as a handle. And I'm not going to talk my way through all of this. We're just going to go really fast. And and test along the way, but let's get started. Okay, that's just about as close as I can get right now. Let's test fit it and see if it works. Okay, it took some fitting to get this, to get the hammer to close, but I just followed the instructions and it took me right there. So let's get this guy installed now and see what the timing looks like. Let's get this guy assembled is what I meant to say. All right, here's the moment of truth. Okay, it locks up. No wiggle. No wiggle, no rotation. Wow. Okay. All right. Well, I'm pretty stoked about that. That'd be my first time to fit a pawl. And I want to thank again, I can't say it enough, thank you, Mr. Ron Power, for providing a test, an example part. And that was really helpful. But the instructions that come with the oversized pawl and the videos that are online from Power Customs, very, very helpful. And so let's set the Teslon bore scope up now and see how our timing looks looking through the barrel at the chambers. All right, well, I took some measurements here of the image, knowing that the bore diameter or the chamber diameter is 0.216 because I've already used my fancy gauge pins to determine that. And so I came up with a conversion factor. I'll skip all the math that I did, but what I'm looking at right here, and there's the image, what I'm looking at is a maximum misalignment of 0.03 or 0.0033, and that's within the tolerance allowed for optimum precision that number I got from Mr. On Power. But let's cycle through all 6 chambers and see how things look. And by the way, I'm going to rotate, and you can see very little play right there. I think I made it through all 6. Okay, there's nothing left for us to do now but to go shoot. And we'll see if this old guy right here is going to be able to squeeze whatever accuracy potential is available in this Ruger Single 6. We'll see if we can put it on paper or on steel. And so let's head down to the range. It's now or never. Well, you've watched it firsthand. That's better shooting than we ever did with the Ruger Single 6 before we did the modifications and did the investigation. And I want to say thank you so much to all of you guys and girls for sticking with me through all of these videos. My goodness, it's been a ton. But I think I could jack forever, but I'm just going to say thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.